This is reading files in Python. In this screencast, we will be taking a look at the open function in Python, which gives you the ability to open a file and also to go through and get the contents of the file either all at once or one line at a time. Python makes it very easy to work with files. For this screencast, we're going to worry about just reading out of a file, and we will take a look at writing to files, creating your own files later in the course. Okay, so I've already created a text file that just has a little bit of text in it. And you can see this. I'll use the cat statement, which you have if you're on Macintosh or Linux. And I called this my file.txt. You should be able to create a similar file. If you want, it can obviously contain anything, but if you're following along, you want to do this yourself. Just create a little text file and save it, give it a name. And so the idea is there's two main ways to read a text file in Python. The first one is to read it all at once, which will work if the file is relatively small, but one of the other things you want to watch out for is if you are reading the entire contents of a file and the file is huge, like 100 gigabyte log file or something like that, you might not be able to load it all into main memory. It might just be too big to store in memory. So you may want to have the option of visiting each line of the file one line at a time, and Python gives you that option as well. The first step, regardless, is to open the file. And this open function does not require for you to import a module or anything. It's always available in Python. Really, really simple, as you can see. All you have to do is say the name of the file that you want to load. And the return value of this open function is a file object. Python has this interesting series of file objects, which they sometimes refer to as file-like objects. This is just something for you to devote a brain cell to. Keep this in the back of your head as you progress with Python, because you may not see it again in this course, but in future courses you will see the concept of a file-like object come up again and again. And one of the nice things about this is that it's a really nice note in the language. It's a nice sort of thing about the design of the language, is that a lot of things that look and act and behave like files, including in-memory constructs, as well as other types of things like delimited files, which we talk about in our crunching public data course. These all have similar sets of properties and functions associated with them. So once you have a good understanding as to how a file object works, you can utilize the same patterns in working with other file-like objects that exist elsewhere in Python's standard library. Not going to go into it right now, but it's just something for you to think about and remember for later when you run across in the documentation this idea of a file-like object. If you know how to deal with a file, you can deal with a file-like object. Okay. Next step is let's do the easy part, which is read the entire contents of this file, and I'll just say contents equals f.read. This takes the whole contents of the file, puts it into that variable, and then I can say print contents, right? So this is going to do just what you would assume. In fact, it's going to do the exact same thing as catting the contents of the file. You can say, oh, I need to call this the right way. We'll say Python file.py. And there it is, just as you would expect. It read the entire contents of the file into a variable and then dumped it into the screen with a print statement. Okay, so let's do this the slightly more sophisticated and possibly better way. I'm going to comment out these two lines here. I'm going to just leave them here, but this will work in a situation where you want to visit every line in the file, but you don't want to load the entire file into memory. Maybe you think you're going to be working with somewhat larger files, or you just want this to be a little bit more effective. The file object exposes a list object, which gives you the ability to use a for construct to visit every line in the file in a loop. So I'm going to say for line in f. Line is a variable that's going to be a temporary variable. It's going to store one line of text coming from that file until you get to the end. And then once you get to the end, there will be no more lines and the loop will exit, right? And then I'm going to say print line. Okay, so the logic of that should be pretty straightforward. I'll run this again now, and I should get the same output as I got before. But I didn't. So what happened? What happened was that when I printed the line, print adds a line break, but there already was a line break at the end of each line, right? So what I need to do is to tell the print statement to suppress the additional line feed that it adds to the end of each line. And it's really easy to do this in Python. Just add a comma onto the end. The comma in a print statement says print this, but then don't print the extra line break. Okay, so I add the comma, go over up here, and I run it again, and I get the same thing again. Okay, so that's it. Now obviously, again, this is a super simple example. Just printing out the contents of a text file is sometimes useful, but more often what you might want to do is to do some kind of some sort of logic. And if you wanted to do some kind of logic based on the contents of the file, you wanted to read the file, that sort of thing, you would do it right here in the loop. Pretty straightforward. If you wanted to manipulate the file, like you wanted to add stuff onto the end, you wanted to be able to append, create new files, that sort of thing, you can do that in Python as well too. And the techniques that you use are almost as simple as you use for reading files, but we're going to cover that in a future screencast.